Hello and thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight. I'm Nick Blumberg. Brandis Friedman is on assignment. Here's what we're looking at.
This budget has been the one that we have been not just fighting for, but waiting for.
Mayor Johnson makes good on his promise to avoid a property tax hike in his budget and limit cuts to city services. Meanwhile, Cook County unveils its spending plan for next year, also without raising property taxes, but warns that turmoil looms. Board President Toni Preckwinkle is here to explain. And a new book searches for answers into the tragic sinking of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald 50 years later. First off tonight, Mayor Brandon Johnson is calling for more than $600 million in new taxes on the wealthiest Chicagoans and the city's largest firms. It's part of his plan to fill a massive budget deficit and blunt the impact of cuts ordered by the Trump administration. Let's listen to a bit of what Johnson told alderpeople this morning at City Hall about his $16.6 billion spending plan.
As I speak this morning about our budget, we have National Guard troops from the state of Texas that are waiting on a court order to deploy to our streets. Our federal government is in a shutdown with no end in sight. Masked men with long guns, armed vehicles, who have shot residents with no transparency and no oversight. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. If we fail to invest in community safety in this budget at historic levels, the federal government will try to use that as justification for military occupation of our city.
Our Heather Sharon joins us now with more on how Johnson plans to fill the city's budget gap of nearly $1.2 billion. Certainly a tall order. Heather, who's going to pay more under this proposed budget?
Well, the biggest tax increase would hit big tech firms like Google and Salesforce that pay a lease tax to operate in Chicago. But also big businesses that have more than 100 employees would have to pay a reimposed head tax, charging them $21 for every employee over 100 workers. That is where most of the controversy is going to be. But the big news, at least as far as the mayor is concerned, is about who won't pay a cent more. Homeowners who won't pay more in property taxes or pay more to have their garbage hauled away.
Well, and Mayor Johnson also proposed taxing social media firms in addition to some of the tech companies you mentioned. How exactly would that work?
Well, nobody's quite sure because this would be a first of its kind tax. They want to tax social media companies like X and Blue Sky and Facebook for every user over 100,000 users and make them pay 50 cents per month. Is it legal? Nobody knows, but the city's going to try. They want to use that money, which would be about $31 million, to fund the city's mental health clinics and to make the city's alternate response program, which sends counselors to those experiencing a crisis rather than a police officer.
Chicago loves to be a first, so we're sort of breaking new ground here. All right, well, the reaction to this plan, as it often does, came pretty fast and furious after the mayor's speech. Take us through what folks had to say. Business
Organizations, including the chamber, are outraged. This head tax, they say, will be a job killer, but the Progressive Caucus, which nearly sank Johnson's budget last year, they were heartened and encouraged that it does not impose taxes on working class Chicagoans, but it is going to be a long haul until the budget actually gets passed.
And of course, as you pointed out, there was a head tax in the past, but
yes,
it's hard to reinstate something that people don't like. What are the next steps here?
Well, budget hearings start on Tuesday in the hopes of reaching an agreement by the end of the year. Nobody expects the city council to rubber stamp the budget like they did under former mayors Daley and Emanuel. So the final package will probably look different than the one we saw today, but exactly how, you'll have to stay tuned.
And I know you'll be watching all those hearings. Certainly a contentious set of budget negotiations. Last time, hopes from the mayor's team that things might go a little more smoothly this round?
They do, and they did that by telegraphing that Johnson was going to ask what he calls the ultra-rich and sort of the wealthiest big firms to shoulder more of this burden. He, of course, sort of used sort of the crisis of the Trump administration to sort of say, look, we've got to make these big changes. Whether it works, we'll have to see.
And I know you'll be watching. Heather Sharon, thanks so much.
Thanks, Nick.
And you can read Heather's full story on our website. It's all at WTTW.com/news. A federal judge says she has serious concerns about whether immigration agents are following her orders not to use non-lethal munitions or tear gas on protesters and journalists unless they pose an immediate threat to public safety. U.S. District Court Judge Sarah Ellis brought both parties to a lawsuit back into her courtroom today after new reports of immigration agents using tear gas on a crowd of people, including Chicago police officers attempting to control the crowd earlier this week. What's more, she's ordering federal agents with body cameras to have them turned on during encounters with protesters. Ellis also ordered another hearing for Monday to hear from the field director of Operation Midway Blitz. And separately today, a federal appeals court upheld a temporary block on President Trump's attempt to deploy National Guard troops in Chicago. Chicagoans plan another massive protest against President Trump. For the second time in 4 months, organizers are planning a No Kings rally. Demonstrators are set to gather at noon on Saturday in Grant Park and scheduled to march around 1 p.m. And it's not just downtown. There are a slew of other No Kings actions in city neighborhoods and suburbs. We've got more details on our website. Science may have solved the great Chicago rat hole mystery of 2024. Turns out the viral sidewalk rat hole in Roscoe Village is 98.67% likely to be a squirrel hole. Doesn't have the same ring to it. Researchers published an actual scientific paper in the Royal Society journal Biology Letters. It showed that the measurements of the specimen are too big to be a rat and are more likely those of an eastern gray squirrel or fox squirrel. If you want to know why the tail looks more like a rat's tail, well, visit our website. Coming up, how Cook County is planning to fill a more than $200 million budget gap. We hear from County Board President Toni Preckwinkle next.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
As Chicago wrestles with its own budget challenges, Cook County is unveiling a $10 billion budget proposal for next fiscal year. The plan includes no new taxes, employee layoffs, or fees, but things aren't completely in the clear. Officials warn of tough waters in the years ahead as potential federal funding cuts threaten to hit the county's bottom line. Joining us to discuss all that and more is Cook County Board President Toni Preckwinkle. Madam President, welcome back to the program.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
So this spending plan closes the $211 million budget gap the county was facing, doesn't hike property taxes or impose any new fees. How did you manage to come up with the needed money there?
Well, first of all, I want to thank my team, the Bureau of Finance, Tanya Anthony and Kanako Ishida Musselwhite and their crew. You know, we've made hard choices and tough decisions over the last decade and a half, and it's paid off in this difficult moment. We've got a $10.1 billion budget, no new taxes, fines, or fees. You know, I'm proud of the work that we've done. We have a healthy reserve, and our pensions are funded at 66%. And we have a 20-year plan to get to full funding. So we're in great financial shape. We've had bond rating upgrades each of the last 4 years. So the bond rating agencies are happy with the work we're doing, and I hope our residents are.
Yeah, well, I want to talk about some of the specifics coming up, but you know, you referred to last year's spending plan as, quote, a good news budget. When this year's budget came out, you did warn there could be some turmoil ahead. What are the storm clouds you see on the horizon?
Well, half of our budget is health care, and I'm very proud of that. We have a health care system that for 190 years has helped whoever comes to our door, regardless of immigration status, ability to pay, race, age, gender, ethnicity. We should all, as Cook County residents, be proud of that. But, you know, President Trump has declared war basically on the healthcare system in this country, and particularly on Medicaid, which is government insurance for people with moderate incomes. Now, those of us who are over 65 get Medicare, right? And there's no income eligibility for Medicare.
Sure.
But for Medicaid, people under 65, there's a federal program which was expanded under President Obama to include more of our residents. And we have provided not just care in our facilities, our hospitals and clinics, but we've created a Medicaid insurance program, Medicaid managed care program called County Care, which hopefully you've heard about.
Indeed.
And we protect the lives of about 400,000 people in Cook County who are part of our County Care program. So we provide insurance for them in addition to delivering direct care to people through our hospitals and clinics.
And, you know, are you concerned, you know, we've seen massive cuts to Medicaid this year, that those could hit Cook County Health, County Care. You know, how can you address a potential budget gap for some of those needs?
Well, the health and hospital system is putting aside a reserve to help them get through these tough waters. We have reserves on the county side as well. But the way in which the Congress pushed to implement these cuts, many of them are going to take effect not in the 26, but in 27. But we know that there are turbulent waters ahead because Medicaid is our principal provider of revenue for our health and hospital system. I think 53% of our patient revenues come from Medicaid.
Well, speaking of those sorts of cuts, this plan also calls for setting aside, some $65 million to cover, potentially essential services paid for by federal money. Do you see, concerns about more cuts ahead, not even just to Medicaid, down the line from Congress, from the Trump administration?
Well, it's unclear what's going to happen outside of health care. We're concerned, of course, that maybe some of our transportation projects might not be funded. But our particular concerns are healthcare. Again, healthcare is 50% of our budget. So when the federal government says we're going to make you determine eligibility twice a year instead of once, right, it magnifies not just the red tape that people have to deal with, but we think it's a way of reducing the rolls without saying you're reducing the rolls, right? When they talk about work requirements, again, most people on Medicaid are doing something, right? They're working, they're going to school, whatever, right? And in the places in this country where they've implemented work requirements, like Arkansas, one of the things they found is that most of the people who were kicked off, supposedly because they didn't meet the work requirements, were in fact eligible.
Right.
So, instead of a frontal assault on Medicaid, they're doing all these things around the edges to reduce the program, and it's diabolical.
Well, you mentioned transportation, another thing that, falls under the county's purview. The Trump administration has had some legal trouble trying to freeze or cancel money for sanctuary jurisdictions, but now it's going after infrastructure programs like the Red Line extension that take into account women-owned businesses, Black and Latino-owned businesses. Are you concerned that those attacks on infrastructure money could hit Cook County beyond just the Red Line?
That's the reason we put aside the $65 million. He's declared war on blue cities, blue counties, blue states. I can't recall in my lifetime a president of the United States who's been so explicit about going after his political enemies.
You mentioned as well, the issue of immigration status. There's been a dramatic escalation of pretty aggressive immigration enforcement around Chicagoland over the last weeks. Agents deploying tear gas, an attempt to deploy National Guard troops. How can the county respond to this, so-called midway blitz?
The governor of this state has described the ICE agents as jackbooted thugs. He's right. They're kidnapping people off our streets, dragging people out of their homes, sending them to detention centers in this country and gulags in foreign countries. It's disgraceful. It's absolutely disgraceful. And this week, Judge Evans has issued an order that ICE may not come onto county property without a warrant for the arrest of a particular person, warrantless arrests. And likewise, I have issued an executive order to the same effect. I don't want them on county property either. It's hard for me to put it in civil terms, right? The President of the United States is not following the Constitution. He doesn't believe in the rule of law. And as I said, they're kidnapping people off our streets. Obviously, there are a lot of issues going on the sort of policy side. There is also the March primary coming up. Which will probably be here before we know it. You're facing a challenge from Chicago Alderman Brendan Riley, who said, the county budget's tripled in the 15 years since you've taken office. He wants to address crime, spending, corruption. What's your response to his effort to unseat you? Well, first of all, let's talk about the budget. I began by saying we have a $10.1 billion budget, that it's balanced without new taxes, fines, or fees, and that our pensions are funded at 66%. We've had 4 upgrades in our bond ratings in the last 4 years. Now, if the bond rating agencies say that we're in pretty good shape, I'll take their word over my opponents. And let me just say, this is a tough job, and I think I've done it well for the last 15 years. We got after really a struggle for the first 2 or 3 years, we got the county in good fiscal shape. We've addressed the challenges in public safety by working together with the stakeholders to reduce our jail population, get people out who are accused of nonviolent crimes, and who sometimes shoplifters stayed in jail because they couldn't pay, nominal cash bonds. So we've done a lot of work around criminal justice reform. We've kept steady or increased the budgets for our stakeholders in public safety. I think we've done a good job and worked with the state and the city. We have a government alliance for safe communities, and since 2021, the state and the county and the city of Chicago have invested $350 million in violence prevention. And that's working with community-based organizations who do the tough work on the streets of trying to work with people who are likely to be shooters or victims of shootings, to help people who are coming out of detention or incarceration, and to work with community-based organizations that serve at-risk youth. And I'm proud of the work that we've done collectively with the city and the state.
All right, that's where we'll have to leave it, but looking forward to having you back again, Cook County Board President Toni Preckwinkle.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Up next, a new book examines the largest shipwreck in Great Lakes history. 50 years ago, 29 lives came to an end in a massive storm on Lake Superior. The sinking of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald is the largest ship to wreck in the history of the Great Lakes. The huge vessel was renowned for its ingenious design as a cargo ship, but amid nearly hurricane-force winds and waves more than 3 stories high, she broke in two and sank to the bottom. Immortalized in a hit 1976 ballad, despite the Fitz's fame, conclusive answers as to why it sank are still elusive. In the new book, The Gales of November, author John U. Bacon tells the story of the men who crewed the ship, the conditions in which it operated, and the Fitzgerald legacy to this day. And John U. Bacon joins us now. Congratulations on the book.
Nick, thank you.
So this was, a widely celebrated ship upon its construction. As we mentioned, some really clever design elements, very narrow, so it was navigable, lots of cargo room. Not necessarily such an impervious vessel, though, fair to say?
No, it's sad to say it's true. A few reasons. One, these ships, all of them, but especially this one, they're incredibly long, 729 feet long, and only 75 feet wide. That's a skyscraper, 73 stories, and not even the distance between home plate and first base. That's not how you normally make ships, of course. Nowhere else in the world are they like this. It's because of the sewlocks. They have to squeeze through the sewlocks up in Sault Ste. Marie. So that's why. And they swapped out rivets for welds. They're cheaper, they're faster, they're lighter, but they're not as strong.
Yeah. Well, you talk about the value of this trading route that the Fitzgerald was navigating at the time. There were some economic incentives to sailing in November, fairly late in the year, despite the risks. Tell us about that.
Sure. These things, this ship especially, set all the records in the Great Lakes, basically. On this last trip, it took 26,000 long tons of taconite. That's iron ore. That's enough to build 7,000 cars. They did it once a week. I mean, every 5 days they're doing this. So each trip you add, of course, you make that much more money. And in the case of this last trip, Ernest McSorley, the captain of the ship, he tacked on one more week before he retired. He and 5 others on the ship. Why? Because his wife, Nellie, is sick in Toledo, and this bonus was going to pay for her medical care.
Yeah, and a lot of folks that you write about that were very close to calling it, and I want to get into some of their stories, but you wrote that it's finding the ship has proven far easier than determining why it sank. Tell us a little bit about the storm they faced and why it's so hard to pin the exact cause of the wreck down.
Sure, it really was, Nick, a storm of the century. You had 3 elements going on at once. One, the longer winter takes to arrive, the angrier it shows up. It was 70 degrees in Duluth the day they left. You don't want that because it's like water behind a dam. The more water you have, the worse it's going to be. So beautiful weather means it's going to turn nasty fast. You got a cold front coming in from Canada and a warm front coming in from the southwest United States. And these 3 elements are going to combine right in front of Whitefish Bay like a catcher in front of home plate. And that was waiting for the Edmund Fitzgerald when it showed up on Monday.
But it's been hard to determine, in retrospect, exactly what went wrong with the ship.
True. Obviously, a once-in-a-lifetime storm. There are a lot of theories out there. The hatch covers, it was the Coast Guard's theory. Others say somebody swamped by a wave. It might have hit bottom at 6 Fathom Shoal near Caribou Island in the middle of the lake. I go with those who say, Matthew Collette at University of Michigan, that it's almost always a combination of forces. Nature, mechanical failures, some decisions that could have gone the other way. Of course, Ruth Hudson, the mother of Bruce Hudson, she had the best line about this one. Only 30 know, 29 men and God, and the rest of us are guessing.
Yeah, well, speaking of Ruth Hudson, she was somebody who, really fought to keep her son's memory alive. This book really delves into the personal stories of the men who crewed the Fitzgerald. Why was it important to you to tell it through that lens?
That, to me, was the driving force of the story. Most of the books written on this is the whodunit, what happened, and again, we're still not quite sure. But I want to know who the 29 men were. What are their families like? What are they doing when they're on board? All these basically personal stories. Ruth Hudson is one of my favorites. She's 4'9", but as her niece said, but she told you she was 5'5", and you believed her. She was a spitfire, to say the least. Her only child was Bruce Hudson, a 22-year-old deckhand on a break from Ohio State University, and of course it cost his life.
And she was known to a lot of the folks, in the community of survivors as Aunt Ruth.
She was even known by Gordon Lightfoot as Aunt Ruth. He talked to her on her deathbed, and they were that close. So a real force to be reckoned with. She lost her only child that day. Flip side is she didn't know that his girlfriend was pregnant. Mm-hmm. So 6 months later, she becomes a grandmother out of nowhere.
Yeah. Was there a story that you learned while reporting out this book that particularly surprised you or kind of captured your imagination?
Nick, when I started 4.5 years ago, I knew about 5% of this. So pretty much all of it. That's why it took me 4 years, basically. Another story that I thought was poignant, Eddie Binden, first engineer on this ship. He was about to retire also at 47. His wife and he were celebrating their 25th anniversary. He goes across from Superior, Wisconsin to Duluth the day before they leave to buy a 25th anniversary diamond ring. And he gives it to a friend of his to mail it to his wife. Why not put it in your duffel bag? Yeah. You're going to see your wife in 3 days on the docks of Toledo. But he gives it to his friend, and of course the ship goes down. A week later, she receives the ring. She wore it the rest of her life and never remarried. Yeah.
There was a really notable story to me where you sort of talk about the sailor's code of the men who were traversing the Great Lakes. There was a fellow captain who turned back to look for the ship despite the danger that he and his crew faced. Tell us about that.
This man's done his homework, by the way, just in case you were wondering. Yes, true. My concern writing the book is, okay, we lose everybody. How are there heroes out of this? These guys were heroes before they got on the ship. All our stuff comes from these ships, it turns out. Food, steel, cement, you name it. But more heroes, the guys who got to Whitefish Bay right after the Fitzgerald, they just survived the storm of their lives. They're lucky to be alive, they know it. Coast Guard asked them to go back out on a fool's mission. You're not gonna find this ship. You know you're not gonna find this ship. And they went out anyway, because, why? And I talked to one guy, Rick Barthulli, on that ship. He said, because they would have done it for us, and that keeps you alive.
It's been 50 years, as we mentioned, since the ship sunk. Did you feel that time crunch, trying to talk to as many folks as possible while they were still with us?
Nick, I got lucky. I found 6 former crewmen who had been on the ship, obviously, before it went down. So they're still around, not more of those. I found one guy in the Arthur Anderson that night, the closest we can get to what it was like for the Fitzgerald. I got to half the families. The 2 guys who wrote the stories are still alive in their 80s. 2 guys in the band, the drummer and the bass player, they're still alive. I just kept getting lucky with my sources. You couldn't do this book in 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what do you hope readers take away from this book? There's a lot to it. There's a lot of elements.
There are a lot of elements. I guess if there are 2 things, is Great Lakes shipping is immensely important. Like I said, it's where all our stuff comes from. It's an invisible industry because these guys are on a ship 9 months out of the year, so you're not going to meet them. So we don't know these guys, but that's where all our stuff comes from. Right. They risk their lives every time they go out there. So that is one thing. B, who these people really are, and the families. I talked to Heidi Wilhelm was a 12-year-old girl who lost her father. You don't get over that, even 50 years later. And also one surprising thing that really blew my mind, the Great Lakes are considered more dangerous than the ocean for those who sail them. I never would have guessed that. Saltwater versus freshwater is the main reason. And it's a true story. So pretty amazing.
Yeah, a lot to learn in this book. John Bacon, thanks so much.
Nick, thank you.
Again, the book is called The Gales of November. And we're back right after this. And that's our show for this Thursday night. Be sure to check out our new weekly newsletter, Urban Nature, where we explore the Chicago area's natural wonders, local wildlife, environmental news, and much more. You can sign up today at WTTW.com/newsletter. And join us tomorrow night at 5:30 and 7 for the Week in Review. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Nick Blumberg. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that supports inclusionary excellence throughout the legal profession.